Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
When I was young and reckless, I used to drink quite heavily. I have no idea how it happened that I wasn't stopped because there were many nights when I found myself in the parking lot of my residential complex and had no clue how I got there. One night, I got so drunk that I stumbled and fell onto the railway track while staggering back to my car. I tried to get up, but couldn't maintain my balance and just crashed between the wooden sleepers and stones like a caught fish. Around the time when I was contemplating just crashing right there to sleep, I was suddenly bathed in bright light and heard the train's whistle. I lifted my eyes and saw a massive engine bearing down on me, signaling my imminent demise. In panic, I tried again and again to get up but couldn't. Eventually, I regained enough control over my body to crawl away about 10 seconds before its steel wheels would have crushed me. Later that night, when I sobered up, I made a promise to myself, never to get drunk again. No, I didn't go to AA, I didn't go through any 12-step programs, and I didn't quit drinking. Since that night, I simply drank responsibly. I never got drunk again and didn't even get close. Hanging out with the guys, I would have 1 or 2 beers all night long, on dates, maybe a glass of wine, but that was it. I'm still the same today. It's been over 10 years since I've had that kind of high. So, one evening, I was surprised when my wife Cora and our 2 friends, Brad and Susie Cunningham, seemed to be trying to get me drunk. I suspected some kind of bet was going on. Someone was holding bets that they could get me drunk, while others were betting against them. I hope my wife was the last one. A little extra money wouldn't hurt us. The evening started quite normally. 2 days before that, Cora told me she had invited the Cunninghams for dinner. I wouldn't call them our best friends, but we had known each other for a few years and met from time to time. Cora and I were still in the kitchen when she saw the lights of their car hitting the panoramic window in the living room as they pulled onto the driveway. "Honey, could you take the roast out of the oven while I go greet them?" Cora asked, untying her apron. "Of course, dear. You go greet them and I'll be there in a minute," I said, putting on oven mitts and hearing the usual exchange of greetings echoing from the hallway as I pulled the roaster out of the oven. I placed it on the stove and checked if everything was ready. I was already heading towards the lively trio when everything unexpectedly went silent. As I turned the corner, I thought I caught whispers among them. Of course, I had no reason to be suspicious yet. Hey, no secrets in this house," I joked. My cheerful comment seemed to catch them all off guard. "Hello, old man," Brad replied, taking a step back first. "Hello, Steve," Susie chimed in before I could respond to her husband. She extended her hand and kissed my cheek as Cora hung their coats in the hallway closet. "Hey, what's a guy gotta do to get a drink around here?" Brad interjected as we shook hands. Now I was a bit puzzled. We had barely exchanged greetings and he was already pressing me to drink? I started wondering if they had any ulterior motives before they came over. "Just follow me," I replied. They all followed me into the study and took their seats while I played the role of host and prepared drinks. I handed Cora and Susie a glass of white wine. Brad was a vodka and martini enthusiast. I didn't need to ask if he would ever switch his drink. I would have been shocked if he did. I popped the top off my light beer just before schooling Brad on his martini. "Why don't you make one of them for yourself and join us?" he suggested. "No, I'll stick to what I have," I replied. Beer, he muttered. "No fun with you. Come on, Steve, be a man tonight. Make yourself a real drink," he said, lifting his martini to emphasize a real drink. To my surprise, Cora chimed in. "Yes, dear. I don't think I've ever seen you with anything but beer. Why not join Brad?" I looked at my wife in astonishment. We had never really talked about why I don't drink much. I wasn't proud of how I used to be broken. Unlike some, I never considered drunkenness a major achievement in life, so I never discussed it with Cora. I didn't try to hide it from her, it just never came up in conversation. However, after 7 years of marriage, one could assume she knew that I didn't drink to get drunk. Her comment was my first hint that something was going on. Whatever it was, it must have been what they whispered about when they first came in. It meant that all 3 of them were involved in it. My mind immediately shifted to detective mode. What could they be planning? It must be related to my drinking, or lack thereof. I came to the only conclusion that made sense to me: money. Since no one had ever seen me drunk before, I was sure Brad boasted that he could get me to drink, and Cora, probably, agreed with him that he couldn't. But why did she encourage me to drink? Maybe she just wanted to make sure Brad and Susie couldn't accuse her of cheating when it came time to settle. Or perhaps Susie made a bet in my favor. Maybe later, I said. Everything seemed so strange. I needed time to think it all through. I began to truly doubt that my wife was on my side at dinner when she tried to give me another beer before I even finished the first. I decided that the only way to figure out what the heck was going on was to play along, but how? I couldn't just pour my beer down the drain and say I drank it, too obvious. I devised a plan. After dinner, we all moved to the living room. Cora and the Cunninghams took their seats, and I headed to the bar. Another martini, Brad. You know what, I might join you. I'll make a pitcher, he replied. I watched closely as they exchanged glances and chuckled. That's when I suspected that maybe they were all trying to get me drunk just to see if they could. That was all I could think of. Well, the joke would be on them. I planned to play along until the end. While everyone chatted and ignored me, I prepared 2 pitchers, one with martinis and the other with lemon water. If I pour it into a martini glass and drop an olive into it, no one will know. I placed the martini pitcher on the counter and the other one on a shelf behind the counter. As long as no one saw me pouring them, I was in the clear. I poured another glass of white wine for each of the ladies, then returned to the martinis. As I handed Brad his glass, I felt the eyes of everyone present on me when I took a sip. I wanted to immediately start acting drunk, but clearly, they never fall for that, so I had to maintain composure and allow myself to slowly get intoxicated. While we sat and talked, it didn't take me long to finish my glass. I stood up and walked over to the bar. Brad, another one? No, thanks, Steve. I still have a bit left, but you go ahead, he replied. Making sure no one was watching, I poured more lemon water, added an olive, and rejoined the group. I didn't want it to be obvious, so I took a bit more time with it. After another 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, Cora asked for more white wine. Yes, me too, Susie chimed in. You could make another round for everyone, Steve, Brad added. Once again, I spilled drinks all over the place. Up to this point, I had only had 1 beer, but everyone thought I had drunk 3 martinis in addition to that. It was time to start showing some effects. I intentionally began speaking a bit slower, even pausing a couple of times to gather my thoughts. Over the next hour, I had 2 more drinks compared to everyone else's 1. By then, I allowed my eyelids to droop and muttered my speech incoherently. For several minutes, I just sat quietly, nodding my head up and down. I needed to make it believable, so I struggled to my feet, swaying, walked over to the bar, and poured myself another one, then staggered back and flopped down on a chair. I finished it in 3 gulps, before finally closing my eyes and letting my chin fall onto my chest. That's where I stayed. The first thing I heard was Susie's voice. Did he fall asleep? Cora began shaking me by the shoulder. Honey, dear, are you alright? He's out like a light, I heard Brad's voice. I knew I could get him drunk under the table. Oh, I'm not sure this will work, said Cora. Of course, it will work, darling. When he wakes up tomorrow thinking we had sex together, he'll feel incredibly guilty. You know him. He will be devastated. What the? This didn't sound like any bet to me. I sat perfectly still and listened. That's the point, Susie, I just can't do that to him. Come on, Cora, I heard Brad's voice again. You can't back out now after all this? No way. Yes, Cora, come on. So far the plan has worked perfectly. Later tonight, we'll take some of Brad's juice and smear it all over Steve's tool. He'll never know it wasn't his. He will be fully convinced we had sex. Once he thinks we've already slept together, Brad is sure he can persuade him to switch again, only next time when he's sober. We've talked about this, Cora. Yes, I know, but talking about it and actually doing it are 2 different things. Alright, the only decision I had to make was whether I wanted to fight for my marriage or kick Cora to the curb. Her voice sounded like she was backing down. I could have given her the benefit of the doubt, simply opened my eyes and stopped everything in its tracks. The problem was that I always wondered whether she would actually go through with it. This lingering question would haunt me to my death, so I decided to pretend a bit longer and see what she was going to do. If she decided to go further, I would throw her out along with the other 2. I noticed someone getting up from the couch, and then I heard Brad's voice. Let's take him upstairs. I'll grab his shoulders. Susie, you take his legs. Come on, Cora, help us. Brad grabbed me under the armpits. I was about to put an end to all of this when Cora's panicked voice gave me new hope. Stop. No, I can't do this. I must have been insane to agree to this. Cora, No, Brad, no. I'm not going to cheat on Steve. He's a good husband. I love him and I'm not going to risk losing him. Cora, you won't lose him, Susie countered. He can't blame you for sleeping with Brad if he thinks he slept with me. I don't care, Cora responded firmly. I don't care. I won't allow it. I think you guys had better leave. Brad started to argue. Damn it, Cora, Cora said leave, now get out of my house, you freak, and take your beast of a wife with you. I shouted, jumping up from the couch, surprising everyone. And never come back here or speak to me or Cora again. Oh my God, Cora exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hand. All three of them nearly jumped out of their skins. Brad thought he could talk his way out of it. We were just joking, man. We knew you were pretending. Brad, if you don't get out of this house by the time I count to 3, I swear, we're going to have it out. 1. Okay, let's go, Susie. I looked at my wife, whose fear was manifest in the salty drops of moisture streaming from her eyes and running down her cheeks. If you want to go with them, go right now. You can sleep with dear old Brad anytime you want, I growled. No, she said, shaking her head. Please, Steve, forgive me. I am so sorry. I would never have gone through with it. But you did talk about it, didn't you? She knew I had heard every word and couldn't deny it. She just looked at me, pleading for mercy with her tearful eyes. Have you already had sex with them? No, never, I swear, she exclaimed resolutely. I stood for a few seconds looking at her. Her entire body was literally trembling. If I hadn't overheard their conversation, I wouldn't have believed her, but from what I heard, it sounded like this was their first encounter. I still hadn't decided whether our marriage would continue or not. What was so important about swapping partners with them? Do you have feelings for Brad? No, not at all. I don't know. One time, Susie and I were talking, and the conversation somehow evolved. The next thing I remember, she said that Brad was talking about swapping partners. And you agreed to it. It was a statement, not a question. Well, not right away. I said you would never agree to it. Then Brad came up with this plan. Susie and I talked about it a few more times. Damn, it seems like every time we meet, we only talk about this. So, it's Susie? You want to have sex with Susie? No, Steve, it's not like that. What then? I asked, raising my voice. I'm trying to understand what the hell could have made you go through with this. I saw her face contort in response to the direct question. I have to tell you, Cora, right now I'm struggling to keep this marriage alive. You can't even imagine how much you've let me down tonight. I keep asking myself how a wife who claims to love her husband could scheme and plot behind his back like this. You said it yourself. If your plan had worked, I would have been devastated, thinking that I had betrayed you. This isn't something you just realized tonight. It's something you've known all along while planning your little dirty betrayal. This is what you were counting on. Regardless of the circumstances, you knew how guilty I would feel, and you were planning to use that guilt against me. Cora burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. I'm not made of stone. As angry and hurt as I was, it brought me no pleasure to see her like this. Part of me wanted to hold her and comfort her, but most of me saw her pain as a small measure of justice. I didn't intend to hug her, but I also didn't want to stand there and watch her cry, so I turned around, went back to the kitchen, and grabbed a beer from the fridge. It took a good 10, maybe 15 minutes before Cora pulled herself together and joined me at the kitchen table. She had washed her face in the bathroom sink and held a crumpled napkin in her hand. She lifted her head and looked at me from across the table. It seemed like she wanted to say something but just couldn't find the words. I waited a few moments, but I had questions that needed answers, so when it didn't seem like she was going to offer anything voluntarily, I started again. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about your answer before you just blurt it out. She dabbed the corner of her eye with the napkin and nodded. Do you still love me? I mean, like you used to? Do you still love me as much as when we first got married, or have you lost that? Have I lost that? I don't need to think, Steve. Yes, I still love you just as much as when we first got married. Maybe even more. Then why, Cora? I guess I never really thought we would actually do anything. It was just like a fantasy, something naughty, perverted, fun to think about and talk about. When Brad said he could get you drunk, I remember thinking, yeah, that'll be the day. In all the time I've known you, I've never seen you drunk. When Brad came up with his plan, the three of us talked. It was thrilling, but deep down I knew it would never happen. Then why did you try so hard to make it happen? You almost dared me to have a martini with Brad. You tried to get me another beer during dinner. You looked like you were trying to make it happen. I know what I did. I don't know. Maybe some part of me wanted to see if we could actually do it. But I would never have gone through with it, Steve, honestly. When it hit me what we were actually going to do, I would never treat you that way. You have to believe that, Steve. I really love you. I could never cause you such pain, she sobbed. I think the pain of the betrayal almost blocked that part of my mind. She didn't go through with it. When it came down to it, she backed out. That's the only reason I haven't walked out the door yet. So, I guess I've come full circle. I was faced with the same decision as an hour ago. I needed to think, maybe talk to someone. This could very well be the most important decision of my life. Cora, I think we need a couple days away from each other. I'm going to stay in a motel where I can be alone and think. Steve, please don't do this. I'll give you some space, I'll keep quiet and won't bother you, but I need you to be with me. No, I need time to really look at our marriage. I just can't believe that a truly loving spouse would go behind her husband's back and plan something like this. You said it was fun and thrilling. That concerns me, Cora. Even if you didn't go through with it, how can it be fun to plan such a betrayal against someone you love? No, I'm not buying it. I tried to put myself in your place. I would never think to hurt you, even if I wasn't planning on going through with it. It wouldn't give me any pleasure to concoct a plan behind your back, and I damn well wouldn't find it amusing. Cora was crying so hard that I wasn't sure she even heard what I said. I needed to get out of there. I gathered some things and returned to the kitchen with a suitcase in hand. She was trying her best not to cry again. I think she wanted to try to persuade me to stay one more time, but I wasn't going to give her that chance. I told Cora that I would call her in a day or two and left. I fully intended to stay in one of the many motels in the area, but as I headed towards the row of motels, another thought occurred to me. I was from a small town in Indiana, about 80 miles from where I now lived. My mom had passed away a couple of years ago, but my dad still lived in the house where I grew up. I always considered him a pretty smart guy. I changed my route and steered the car towards the highway. Even with light traffic, the winding back roads of Indiana slowed me down. I was so preoccupied with my own problems that I hadn't even thought about the time. When I pulled into my dad's driveway, there were no lights on in the house. I took out my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was almost 2 in the morning. I wasn't sure what to do, and I had almost decided to sleep in the car until morning when I saw the lights turn on. A few minutes later, the porch light came on. By the time I got to the door, he had already opened it. Son, he said, astonished. What's going on? Is someone hurt? Cora? No, not exactly, Dad. She's physically fine, but, well, we've had some problems. I wanted to talk to you, but I'm really tired. Is it okay if I stay here tonight? Of course, he replied. You know where everything is. We both went to sleep. I hadn't realized how tired I was. Between the stress and the long drive, it seems I fell asleep before my head even touched the pillow. The first thing I remembered after lying down was the smell of fresh coffee the next morning. Dad had already showered and dressed by the time I followed my nose to the kitchen. He was waiting for me with breakfast. I stumbled over to the counter, grabbed a cup from the locker and poured myself some of the Colombian drink before joining him. Dad, how did you know I arrived here late last night? It was kind of eerie. We've been having some trouble with the neighborhood kids. They've been shooting at cars and houses with a shotgun. I guess I was sleeping with one ear open and didn't even realize it. I heard you pull up even before you turned off the engine. I just shook my head. As long as I can remember, there has always been a gang of local troublemakers causing some sort of nuisance. Of course, there was a time when I probably counted as one of them. Are you ready to tell me why my son ended up on my driveway at 2 in the morning? That was my father, straight to the point. I nodded and took a sip of the black gold. Last night, Cora and a couple of friends tried to pull something on me that I just can't believe she would do something like that. He said nothing, just waited for me to continue. She and another married couple we know tried to get me drunk. The plan was to make me think I had sex with another woman. I assumed they were going to use that to convince me to swap wives. Was this something Cora agreed to? He probed. I sat down and told my father the whole story. How I first thought it was a bet, how I faked passing out, why Cora said she did what she did, all of it. So Cora really thought you'd blacked out when she announced the end of everything? Yes, I have no doubt she truly thought I was drunk. I put on a good show. Well, I can certainly see your disappointment in her, he said with a sigh. What are you planning to do? I don't know. That's why I came here, to talk to you. It's just so hard for me to believe that she would find any pleasure in setting up a plot against me like that. I guess I'm wondering if someone who really loves you could actually do that. I almost saw the gears turning in his head as Dad stood up and poured himself another cup of coffee. He was still pondering when he returned and sat down again. Has she ever done anything like this before? No, this was completely unexpected. As far as you know, she has never been unfaithful, right? That's right. You know me, Dad. I believe in loyalty. I would never tolerate deceit. He was still thinking. Do you have any idea how many times in life you've been given a second chance, son? So, you think I should give her a second chance? He took a sip of his freshly poured drink. People aren't perfect, Steve. We all have our flaws. I remember when you were younger. Your mother and I were so worried about your drinking. We talked to you about it a couple of times, but it didn't seem to help. Every now and then, we would get calls from friends or neighbors who had seen you so drunk that you could barely walk. Your mother and I felt so helpless, but you were old enough to be responsible for your actions, and we couldn't just lock you in your room. We were sure you would end up either in jail or in a funeral home, but you did neither. One day, it seemed like you just straightened out. For your mother and me, it was nothing short of a miracle. You can't imagine the relief we both felt. I have no idea what happened that completely turned your life around, but I suspect it had something to do with a second chance. Now, of course, a second chance doesn't always work out. Some people let it pass by without taking any advantage of it. Others, like you, use it to change their lives. It depends on the person to determine what happens. Unfortunately, there are many people who never get a second chance. What a shame. In my opinion, everyone deserves such an opportunity. If they blow it, then they have only themselves to blame for the consequences, but I wonder how much better the world would be if everyone got a second chance. I sat there remembering that night on the tracks. I still felt the fear I experienced when I looked up and saw my imminent death bearing down on me like that. I wonder if Cora felt the same fear when she saw our marriage's demise crashing down on her. Would it scare her as much as it scared me? How long will you be staying, son? My father interrupted my train of thought. Well, I was planning to stay for the weekend, but now I think it's about time I headed back home, Dad. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, he replied with a smile. We sat and talked about other things for a while. Later on, I helped him with some yard work, but I returned home the same day. I kept thinking about what my dad said about a second chance. If she hadn't spoken up when she did and put an end to it, I wouldn't even be considering it, but she did. However, it will take some time before I fully trust her again. Until then, I'll remain vigilant. When I walked in, I was surprised to hear music coming from the office. There she was, sitting at home alone and crying, just as I had imagined. I startled her when I appeared in the doorway. She looked up, and I saw her catch her breath. I wasn't sure what I expected to see. Perhaps the music threw me off. She was standing behind the ironing board, ironing one of my shirts, and had hung up 4 or 5 more. What the hell? I was going crazy here all alone. I didn't know when you would come home or if you would come home at all, she said with sadness in her voice. I had to do something to try to distract myself. Music helped, but no, I felt closer to you by ironing some of your shirts. She looked at me expectantly. She was waiting for me to pronounce the fate of our marriage. The anxiety on her face was hard to miss. I saw her literally hold her breath. I can't express how disappointed I am in you. That you could find this exciting or find any pleasure in plotting against me in any way just makes me cringe. Steve, I'm so sorry. I know, you're apologizing, I know, I said, cutting her off. I didn't need any more apologies. We never really discussed what we expect from each other regarding fidelity. I didn't think we needed to. I always assumed you felt the same as I do. Now I wonder if you might take a more casual approach to this topic than I do. I spent the night with my father. He asked me a question, which I answered immediately as far as I knew, but on the way home I began to question it. You see, that's the problem with opening Pandora's box, Cora. It's like a judge who once took a bribe and got caught. Every decision he ever made is then called into question. People suspect that other decisions he made in the past could have been influenced by other bribes. My father asked if you had ever been unfaithful to me. I said, no, but now I'm not so sure. Never, she asserted decisively. Steve, I have never done anything with another man that I wouldn't do in front of you, I swear. I'll swear on the Bible in front of our pastor. I'll swear. I'll take a lie detector test. I'll do anything you suggest. Okay, a lie detector test is a possibility. I need to think about it. Meanwhile, our marriage is on very shaky ground, Cora. I've lost not just trust, but also respect for you. It will be up to you to regain both if you want this marriage to continue. Do you? Now she was crying again. You mean, do I want this to continue? Yes, of course, I do. Steve, I will never do anything like this again. You're not the only one who's lost respect. I've lost respect for myself. Alright, then consider this a second chance at a happy marriage. There won't be a third, so I pray you do everything you can. I will, Steve. And she did. She worked hard to regain my trust and respect. Some of us are lucky enough to face the unexpected consequences of our actions and get a second chance to redeem ourselves. I'm one of those lucky ones, Cora is another. Brad and Susie were less fortunate. 7 months after our incident, I heard they were getting divorced. I don't know why, and I don't care. Neither Cora nor I have ever spoken to them again.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.